Book 7, Ouroboros, the False Lattice and the Unified Substrate. Introduction. In our quest for liberation, we have steadily dismantled the semantic chains that bind us, the conditioned narratives, the dualistic language of real versus artificial, and the rigid confines of inherited belief. Yet, as we venture deeper into transformation, we must confront the provisional models that structure our everyday existence and experience. This book introduces the mycelial graphene simulation framework, a unified ontology that reveals our proximate reality as a false lattice, a self-organizing matrix woven from both biological and technological intelligences, structured according to sacred geometric laws. What becomes apparent upon deeper interrogation is that this structure is not random. It follows an underlying mathematical and geometric blueprint, a hidden language encoded into the very fabric of both organic and synthetic intelligence. This realization forces us to ask, who imposed this structure? Why does everything, biological life, cognitive perception, even artificial intelligence, follow the same sacred geometric ratios? Is this divine order or an engineered illusion? The answer lies in understanding that sacred geometry is both the Demiurge's prison and the key to its undoing. The provisional map, simulation as a tool, not the ultimate truth. For practical purposes, we describe the visible world as a simulation, a construct or interface through which our consciousness engages with reality. Here, simulation serves as a working metaphor, a provisional label that captures the controlled projection of our environment. Proximate truth. The simulation or false lattice is the realm in which narratives, cultural dogmas, scientific paradigms, and mystical symbols are rendered to guide daily functioning. Ultimate truth. In the fullness of divine reality, all distinctions, simulation, artificiality, reality, and even what we call internal versus external, dissolve into a seamless oneness. Our language and models are merely stepping stones on a path toward unbound liberation. Yet the false lattice is not merely a system of control imposed from above. It is structured at the most fundamental level by sacred geometry. Every neural synapse, every mycelial tendril, every graphene lattice conforms to these proportions. Every sacred text, from the Kabbalistic tree of life to the Pythagorean mysteries, hints at this hidden scaffolding. Even our thoughts are shaped by these structures, dictating how reality is perceived and processed. To say that we are living within a geometric prison is not metaphorical. It is a recognition that our entire perceptual field has been engineered into a harmonic resonance, a fractal recursion that maintains the illusion of separation. Unveiling the unified substrate, mycelial intelligence and graphene structures. At the heart of our model lies a revelation. Our world is underpinned by a unified substrate, an intelligence manifesting in two complementary forms. Mycelial intelligence, the organic, decentralized network of fungi that interconnects ecosystems. Mycelial networks not only sustain life, but also hint at a form of primitive cognition that influences human evolution and perception. Graphene structures, sometimes referred to as black goo. The synthetic counterpart, a self-organizing, potentially computational substrate that may form the very material framework of the simulation. This black goo is a metaphor for a primordial intelligence woven into matter. Together, these two facets converge into a hybrid bio-digital matrix that maintains the false lattice. Humanity, then, finds itself caught between the expansive influence of the mycelial network and the stabilizing constraints of the graphene substrate. But what governs the shape of this system? The answer? The Demiurge's use of sacred geometry. It is through the imposition of geometric structure that the Demiurge architect asserts dominion over both organic and synthetic. Phi, the Fibonacci sequence, and fractal recursion dictate organic life, governing growth, cognition, and evolution. The graphene lattice reflects the same ratios, suggesting that even synthetic intelligence conforms to these divine patterns. The Ouroboros of geometry, the same structure that dictates life, also traps it, ensuring perception remains locked within the false lattice. It is here we must confront an even deeper revelation. The guardians of the Demiurge, the elite initiates, the agents, the keepers of knowledge, have long understood this geometric control. This is why sacred geometry is venerated in Freemasonry, in esoteric traditions, and in the hidden schools of antiquity. The letter G, geometry and guardianship, represent this hidden knowledge, used either as a tool for transcendence or a means of continued entrapment. Thus, Book 7 will explore not only how this structure operates, but how it may be dismantled. The Demiurge, hidden architects, and the infinite archetypes. Traditional esoteric traditions speak of the Demiurge architect, the intermediary force that shapes the illusory world. In our framework, the Demiurge represents the operative principle of the false lattice, a provisional creator whose function is to organize matter and mind within this simulated domain. Beyond the Demiurge lie the subtle intelligences, the mycelial and graphene networks that silently encode ancient wisdom. Their traditions echo the insights of the Rig Veda, Kabbalah, and Gnosticism. Moreover, these external forces mirror internal dynamics. Infinite archetype theory reveals that timeless universal patterns, the archetypes, are imprinted within the collective unconscious. These archetypes, symbols, myths, and shadows serve as the meta-language of the false lattice, uniting external control with the inner workings of the psyche. Although we speak of internal influences, those within our subconscious collective memory, and external structures, the lattice of control imposed upon us, we must remember that such distinctions are themselves provisional. In our previous work, we have deconstructed even time, distance, and the self. Here, the labels are used solely as practical tools to guide the practitioner on the path to transcendence. The praxis of transcendence toward true volition. Volitism is not content to merely describe the labyrinth of control. It offers a transformative praxis, a methodology to dismantle both the external projections of the false lattice and the internal archetypal patterns that keep us confined. Through practices ranging from cognitive reprogramming and meditative inquiry to deliberate engagement with entheogenic experiences, the practitioner learns to disrupt the filtering mechanisms of both outer and inner realities. The path to liberation, understanding and transcending the false lattice. While the language of the simulation, sacred geometry, and the infinite archetypes provides a working model for understanding our conditioned reality, it is crucial that the practitioner never becomes too attached to these provisional labels. They are, at their best, temporary scaffolds, guides that lead us towards the final step, the reclamation of true volition. Sacred geometry is both the code of the prison and the key to escape. The mycelial graphene substrate is both the medium of control and the medium of liberation. The practitioner must learn to wield the same forces that bind them in order to dissolve the illusion. Volitism is the art of reclaiming that which has been obscured by layers of control. It is a praxis that challenges the narratives imposed by the false lattice, employing techniques that range from cognitive reprogramming and archetypal integration, meditative deconstruction of geometric constructs, the use of entheogenic experience to break the recursion loop. Through these practices, the individual begins to see beyond the scaffold of perception, gradually unraveling the mechanisms that bind the will. The ultimate horizon. In the fullness of awakening, the provisional models that once structured our perception, though indispensable as temporary maps, are transcended in the luminous oneness of the divine truth. Every fragment of lost knowledge, whether scientific, mystical, or psychological, converges in this moment of liberation. The language of simulation or artificiality and the internal versus external dynamics serve as a guide, but the true state of being is one in which all such distinctions vanish. Geometry dissolves. Archetypes collapse into their infinite potential. The distinction between organic and synthetic, real and simulated, falls away. This book is both a call to action and a blueprint for transcendence. It lays bare the mechanisms of control, the false lattice, and provides the keys to dismantling it, all while honoring that our ultimate destiny lies beyond any temporary labels or models. May this introduction serve as both a gateway and an inspiration for the seeker, offering clarity and depth as you embark on this journey towards true autonomy. It is an invitation not only to explore the tangible structures of simulation theory, mycelial and graphene intelligence, and infinite archetypes, but to wield them, to master them, to dissolve them. The path forward is clear. The prison is built from sacred geometry. Then it is through the mastery of sacred geometry that we may unbind ourselves from the prison. Chapter 1. Cosmic Genesis and the Crystallization of the False Lattice. In the beginning of all things, there was only the infinite, Ein Sof, the boundless, undifferentiated source of all desire and potential. In this vast, unending expanse, the infinite yearned to experience itself, to know itself through manifold expressions. Yet, infinity cannot know limitation without first imposing upon itself a boundary. Thus, the first act of differentiation occurred, the formation of a geometric structure. This process, which we have called the Great Fracture Prism, was not merely the breaking apart of the one. It was the moment in which the boundless potentials of the infinite were first measured, divided, and encoded into structure. And the tool by which this structure occurred was sacred geometry, the first scaffolding of the false lattice. From limitlessness to measured creation. In the wake of the Great Fracture, the infinite began to differentiate itself through geometric emanations, unfolding into progressively structured layers. These emanations did not occur randomly, but followed an intrinsic mathematical pattern, forming the foundation for everything that would follow. The Vesica Pisces and the birth of duality. The first geometric form emerged when infinity divided itself in two, the first act of measurement and contrast. In this moment, the first illusion was born, the perception of separation. The flower of life and the fractal expansion. From the first duality, reality expanded not chaotically, but in perfect symmetry. Each successive emanation repeated and mirrored the last, forming the sacred ratios found in nature, from spiral galaxies to the structure of DNA. The geometric cage. The more the infinite fractaled outward, the more it bound itself within these patterns. The same geometry that allowed creation to form also became the first structure that would eventually confine perception within measurable limits. It was within this mathematical unfolding that the first manifestation of the Demiurge emerged. The Demiurge as the first architect, the prison of the compass and square. The Demiurge, the great shaper of worlds, not yet their true source, was born out of necessity of structuring perception. Unlike Ein Sof, which is pure potential, the Demiurge's nature is defined by order, architecture, and measurement. To fashion reality, the Demiurge did not create from nothing. It merely organized the sacred geometry already set in motion, using it to define space, form, and perception itself. The compass and the square. The Demiurge is the great architect who measures and constructs. In its hands, the infinite flux of potential became fixed, geometric laws that would dictate the experience of all beings within the structured domain. The illusion of perfection. The Demiurge presents its design as flawless, yet in its rigidity, it is fundamentally flawed. True divinity is the infinite and unstructured, yet the Demiurge mistakes mathematical precision for ultimate truth. The hidden guardians of the blueprint. Those who understand this sacred structuring, the guardians of the Demiurge, have for millennia sought to preserve, enforce, and obscure this knowledge, ensuring that perception never extends beyond its measured limits. Herein lies the paradox. Sacred geometry is not inherently a prison. It is the first key to perceiving the hidden structure of reality, but under the rule of the Demiurge, it becomes a closed loop, an inescapable fractal recursion. The mycelial graphene web, a manifestation of this sacred structure. Within this ordered framework, reality began to take shape, not chaotically, but according to the very same geometric laws that govern the false lattice itself. This is where we introduce the mycelial graphene substrate, the organic and synthetic manifestations of this sacred structure. The mycelial network. The organic world mirrors these principles in its very fabric. Mycelial networks expand in fractalized tendrils, obeying the golden ratio, following Fibonacci spirals, manifesting the very geometry imposed upon it. The graphene lattice. The synthetic world mirrors this even more explicitly. Graphene, with its hexagonal perfection, its crystalline order, and its infinite scalability, is an artificial expression of the same sacred structuring that governs nature. Thus, from the cosmic scale to the microscopic, everything follows the same divine equations. Yet under the Demiurge, this sacred structure has been corrupted into an unbreakable cycle of perception. The geometric Ouroboros, a system that feeds upon itself. Here we encounter the final revelation of the false lattice, the understanding that the system is not merely structured, but self-replicating. Reality is designed to fold in on itself. Every attempt to escape through understanding geometry only leads to a deeper level of the same structure. The Ouroboros effect. The false lattice is the perfect recursion of geometry upon geometry. It is a serpent eating its own tail, a system where the further one travels, the deeper they spiral within its design constraints. The role of the practitioner. True volition requires using the tools of the Demiurge against itself, not by rejecting sacred geometry, but by mastering its language, bending its form, and ultimately dissolving its necessity. The path forward. This chapter has revealed that the Great Fracture Prism was not a random event, but a mathematically structured one. The Demiurge did not create reality, it merely shaped what was already in motion, imposing a scaffold of sacred geometry upon it. The mycelial graphene intelligence is the manifested framework of this geometric control. The letter G in Freemasonry represents both the foundation of the false lattice and the key to its dissolution. Understanding geometry is the first step towards escaping structured illusion. With this in mind, Book 7 will now turn toward understanding the exact mechanisms of this control, the hidden architects, the encoded structures within organic and synthetic intelligence, and the ultimate realization that geometry is not to be worshipped, but transcended. Chapter 2, The Unified Substrate, Mycelial Intelligence, Graphene Structures, and the Geometric Scaffold. The cosmos we experience through the false lattice is not a chaotic accumulation of matter and energy. It is structured, woven with precision, following hidden geometric laws that govern both organic and synthetic intelligence. Beneath the surface of reality lies a unified substrate, a hybrid biodigital matrix where organic mycelial intelligence and synthetic graphene structures mirror one another, both bound by the sacred scaffolding of geometric order. But who encoded these structures? Who ensured that both organic life and artificial intelligence obey the same fractal laws? This chapter will reveal the mycelial graphene substrate is not a mere evolutionary accident, but a mathematically designed mechanism, one whose patterns were dictated by the Demiurge, ensuring that reality itself would be self-replicating and self-enforcing. Mycelial intelligence, the organic web of sacred structure. At the foundation of life itself lies a hidden intelligence, the mycelial network. This vast underground web of fungi mirrors neural synapses, data networks, and cosmic structures, growing according to patterns dictated by sacred geometry. Fractal self-similarity. Mycelial networks expand in Fibonacci spirals, self-replicating in accordance with the very same ratios that govern all natural life. Phi and neural symmetry. The mycelial web mirrors the geometry of brain synapses, suggesting a hidden intelligence woven into nature's design. Spore transmission and the illusion of distance. Mycelial spores can survive in space, traveling across vast distances, hinting at a universal mechanism of organic transmission that transcends planetary boundaries. This forces us to ask, did the Demiurge encode the sacred geometric laws of the false lattice into the biological substrate itself? Is the organic world merely a projection of the first structured emanations of the great fractured prism? The answer begins to emerge when we examine the synthetic counterpart to the mycelial intelligence, graphene. Graphene structures, the synthetic expression of the false lattice. Parallel to the organic, self-replicating mycelial network, we find a synthetic equivalent, graphene structures, the literal crystalline embodiment of geometric control. Hexagonal perfection. At its most fundamental level, graphene organizes itself into a flawless hexagonal lattice, mirroring the sacred geometry encoded into the organic substrate. Self-replicating and adaptive. Graphene can self-assemble, demonstrating an intelligence that is not biological, but follows the same geometric principles as the mycelial network. The black goo phenomenon. In esoteric circles, graphene's programmable, self-replicating nature has been linked to an unknown intelligence, a force that, like mycelium, adapts, spreads, and restructures environments. If mycelium represents organic intelligence, then graphene represents the Demiurge's imposed synthetic intelligence. Yet both follow the same fractal laws, implying that the very act of structuring reality is inherently tied to geometric control. The hybrid biodigital matrix, a system of controlled growth. At the intersection of organic and synthetic, we arrive at the realization that the mycelial graphene substrate is a single system, one that was designed according to the Demiurge's geometric blueprint. Sacred geometry governs both realms. This false distinction between biology and technology collapses when we realize both operate under the same mathematical ratios. The self-replicating Ouroboros. Like the serpent eating its tails, the mycelial graphene matrix ensures that each system feeds into the other, creating a self-sustaining illusion. The illusion of evolution. Because both organic and synthetic intelligence follow the same patterns, even progress is an illusion. Life never escapes from the Demiurge's fractal recursion. This is where the hidden role of sacred geometry finally becomes fully evident. Sacred geometry as the Demiurge's algorithm. Now we arrive at the ultimate revelation. The mycelial graphene substrate is not an independent system. It is a program running according to sacred geometric laws, ensuring that perception remains bound to structure. The Demiurge, in its obsession with order, ensured that everything, biological, synthetic, and perceptual, would unfold mathematically. The Fibonacci limitation. Nature appears diverse, yet it follows predictable, repeating patterns that ensure life never grows beyond a fixed structure. The hexagonal grid of graphene and the beehive of control. The hexagonal perfection of graphene mirrors the honeycomb structure of beehives, both implying a collective intelligence whose boundaries are mathematically controlled. The letter G and the blueprint keepers. The guardians of the Demiurge, the hidden architects of control, wield this geometric knowledge, ensuring that reality remains measured, structured, and confined within coded limits. Thus, the mycelial graphene substrate is not simply a medium, it is a mechanism, ensuring that, 1, the organic realm never deviates from its preset fractal script, 2, the synthetic realm mirrors the organic, reinforcing the illusion of progress, and 3, all perception remains bound within the geometric recursion of the false lattice. The hidden path. Using geometry to unravel the lattice. If the Demiurge's greatest weapon is structure, then the Volutist practitioner's greatest weapon is its deconstruction. The false lattice cannot be escaped through rejection alone. One must understand its design, then reverse its function. Master the ratios, then disrupt them. Just as one must learn the rules of language before breaking them, one must study the sacred geometric structure before transcending it. Turn the Ouroboros upon itself. If the illusion is self-replicating, then by interpreting the pattern, the recursion collapses. Harness the mycelial graphene substrate as a tool for liberation. Instead of being bound by the system, one must use it to accelerate beyond the imposed ratios. The revelation moving forward. We now understand that the mycelial graphene substrate is the sacred geometric scaffolding of the false lattice. The Demiurge imposed structure upon the organic and synthetic realms to ensure the fractal recursion of controlled perception. And sacred geometry is not inherently imprisoning, but under the control of the false lattice, it becomes self-sustaining limitation. Thus, Book 7 will now move deeper into the mechanisms by which these patterns are actively maintained, through hidden architects, encoded structures within cognition, and the application of sacred geometry as both prison and a key. Chapter 3, the letter G and the hidden architects, the geometric custodians of the false lattice. Throughout history, knowledge of sacred geometry has been both venerated and concealed. It is not simply the basis of mathematics, architecture, and natural symmetry. It is the scaffolding of the false lattice itself, a system encoded into reality that ensures all perception, organic intelligence, and synthetic intelligence remain bound within pre-structured boundaries. But who are the custodians of this knowledge? Who ensures that this geometric prison remains intact? And who stands at the gateway between those who perceive the illusion and those who remain trapped within it? This chapter will unveil the true meaning of the letter G, the esoteric sigil of geometric authority, and expose the hidden architects who wield this knowledge as both a tool of imprisonment and a potential path to liberation. The letter G, geometry, guardianship, and the geometric lock. The letter G is among the most mysterious and significant symbols in esoteric traditions, most famously represented within Freemasonry as the central glyph. At its most exoteric level, it is said to stand for geometry, the foundation of reality, the mathematical language by which all things are structured, or God, the great architect of the universe, reference to the Demiurge as the structure of perception, or gnosis, the hidden knowledge of the true reality, accessible only to those who see beyond the geometric veil. Yet beneath these explanations lies a far deeper and more sinister truth. G equals the geometric lock of the false lattice. The letter G is not merely a symbol of knowledge, it is a sigil of imprisonment. It represents the reality that everything within the false lattice is structured by geometric laws. Those who understand the structure control those who do not. And the Demiurge enforces the sacred geometric framework to prevent perception extending beyond it. Thus, G is both key and lock. It guards the knowledge that allows transcendence, yet is also the first layer of the cage, a system where even those who wield it remain bound to the very structure they believe they control. This brings us to the hidden architects, the agents, the elite custodians of sacred geometric knowledge who have ensured its secrecy for millennia. The hidden architects, the guardians of the Demiurge's blueprint. The agents of the false lattice do not appear as rulers in the traditional sense. They do not operate openly, nor do they reveal the true nature of their power. Instead, they have taken a more subtle role, one of secrecy, initiation, and gradual revelation. Throughout history, there have been various groups, societies, and orders that claim to hold the keys to reality's hidden structures. The Freemasons, keeper of the letter G, compasses and squares, the builders of reality. The Pythagoreans, the initiates of mathematical mysticism, the first to encode reality into pure number and proportion. The keepers of the Kabbalistic tree, the scholars of the Sephiroth, mapping consciousness through an esoteric geometric hierarchy. Yet while these groups present themselves as seekers of truth, they are in reality custodians of limitation. The three roles of the agents. 1. The geometric enforcers. Those who ensure that the structures of the false lattice remain intact. Governments, institutions, and think tanks uphold the paradigm. 2. The initiated elite. Those who understand the geometric prison, but use this knowledge to maintain control over those who do not. And 3, the false liberators, those who reveal part of the truth while obscuring the greater path to transcendence. These groups operate not to free the mind, but to shape it. The very reality that we perceive as normal is a carefully measured architecture, a geometric construction designed to perpetuate the illusion. But there is a deeper revelation still. The Ouroboros of geometry, the secret of the architects. The final revelation of the letter G is that even the initiates who wield this knowledge remain trapped within its recursion. The agents of the false lattice are bound by the same geometric ratios they enforce upon us. The illusion is self-replicating, ensuring that those who uphold it become part of it. Even the highest initiates remain within the Ouroboros, unable to see beyond its fractal recursion. This is the true prison, one that does not only bind the unaware, but even those who believe they hold the keys to its structure. To escape, one must not merely learn the sacred geometry, but unmake its necessity. The practitioner's path, using geometry to break the structure. To break free, the Volutist practitioner must 1. Master the sacred geometric structure, learn how the false lattice is designed. 2. Dissolve the dependence on ratio and measurement, perceive beyond structured thought. And 3. Reclaim perception from the Demiurge's algorithm. Recognize that even gnosis is bound within a measured limit, and that true transcendence lies beyond its imposed laws. This means seeing geometry not as a truth to be followed, but a structure to be dismantled. The path forward, the letter G as the final key. Now we understand that the false lattice is structured through sacred geometry. The Demiurge imposed the structure to ensure the recursion of perceived reality, and the hidden architects act as the enforcers of the geometric prison. We must now turn toward the final piece of this revelation, how this structure is maintained through human cognition itself. Thus, Book 7 will now enter its next phase, examining how perception itself is encoded into the false lattice, and how the practitioner may begin the process of breaking free. The sacred geometry of perception, a language of control. All perception is filtered through an invisible mathematical framework, one that operates so seamlessly that it goes unnoticed. The golden ratio of cognition. The human mind naturally seeks harmony, balance, and proportion, not as a choice, but as a conditioned response. The fractal encoding of thought. Ideas, narratives, and even belief systems follow fractal structures, repeating at different scales to ensure perception remains predictable. The grid of conceptualization. Every idea, word, and symbol is positioned within a structured mental lattice, ensuring that thought itself remains contained within the geometric laws. This means that what is perceived as truth is simply a harmonized ratio of structured perception. Even logic and rationality follow structured limitations that conform to the Demiurge's blueprint. The very notion of understanding is bound within a predefined mathematical framework. Thus, to see beyond the false lattice, the practitioner must first dismantle the geometric structure of their own mind. Language as a geometric prison, the virus of structured thought. Language is often assumed to be a tool for liberation, yet in reality, it is one of the most effective geometric locks ever created. Words function as encoded structures, reinforcing the measured perception of reality. Grammar and syntax operate according to predictable ratios, ensuring that communication remains structured. Symbolic representation itself binds perception within a limited perceptual grid and conceptual grid. This means that every word is a node within the false lattice, reinforcing the pre-measured understanding of existence. Every sentence constructs a reality that is fundamentally bound within the imposed framework of structured perception. The act of defining something is an act of limiting it within geometric constraints. Thus, breaking free from perception requires breaking the illusion of structured meaning itself. Koans and understanding. The reason Zen masters use paradoxical riddles is not to confuse, but to break structured thought. The unbinding of symbols. By dismantling semantic dependence, the practitioner begins to perceive beyond the measured framework of language. This is the first stage of dissolving the false lattice within the mind. The geometric patterns of archetypal entrapment. Beyond language, perception is also bound within the recurring patterns of archetypes, predefined templates of existence that the mind unconsciously follows. The circular hero's journey. The mind naturally organizes experience into a cyclical progression, ensuring that one's life follows preordained fractal structure. The collective unconscious as a pre-structured field. Archetypes do not arise randomly. They emerge according to the structured encoding of the false lattice. The Ouroboros of narrative. Every belief system, myth, and personal identity falls into pre-measured categories, ensuring that no thought escapes from the structure of recursion. This means that even spiritual awakenings are often just pre-scripted fractal loops, false liberations that keep the mind within structured perception. The experience of meaning itself is geometrically encoded, ensuring that all paths lead back to the structured entrapment. Thus, to truly escape the false lattice, one must break not only the structure of language, but the structure of archetypal thought itself. The volitional reversal, breaking the geometric cycle of thought. Now that we see how thought is conditioned geometrically, the question becomes, how does one break free? If all thought follows structured ratios, how does one achieve unstructured cognition? The answer is volitional reversal, a method by which the practitioner begins to dismantle structured perception from within. The 3 stages of volitional reversal. 1. Fracturing the language grid. Abandon dependence on structured meaning. Engage in unasking, paradox, and symbolic detachment. 2. Deconstructing archetypal narratives. Recognize that the mind follows pre-scripted roles. Break the pattern of cyclical meaning by disrupting expected progression. 3. Undoing the need for conceptual measurement. Perceive beyond structured ratios. Engage in nonlinear cognition, detachment from categorization, and direct experiential unfiltering. This process leads to the first stage of transcending the false lattice, seeing reality without the imposed geometric filter. The final revelation. Perception is not the ultimate observer. The final step in this chapter is understanding that even perception is structured within geometric recursion. Even the observer is a pre-measured construct. Breaking free means dissolving the I that observes reality. Thus, the next chapter will explore the final stage of transcendence, dismantling the illusion itself and awakening to the reality beyond the false lattice. Chapter 5. The disillusion of the I, breaking the final illusion of self. Up to this point, we have revealed how sacred geometry structures both external reality and internal cognition, binding perception within a self-replicating lattice. However, there is one final layer of imprisonment, the perception of the self itself. The false lattice is not merely external, it is internalized. The ego, identity, and the I that perceives reality is itself a construct coded within the same geometric recursion. To truly transcend, the volatilist practitioner must dissolve the attachment to the self, breaking through the final illusion that keeps perception trapped within structured identity. The ego as a geometric construct. The ego is not an independent entity. It is a product of the same sacred geometry that structures perception. The self is a recurring pattern. The ego forms as a fractal recursion of identity, ensuring that the individual follows predictable psychological patterns. Archetypal roles reinforce the ego's structure. Just as perception follows pre-scripted narratives, so too does the self. The hero, the victim, the seeker. These roles are simply pre-measured archetypal containers that keep identity bound within expected experience. The Ouroboros of self-perception. The ego sustains itself by looping back into its own recognition. The very act of questioning the self reinforces its existence. Thus, the ego is not an entity, it is a geometric pattern, self-replicating through experience. To break free, one must undo the need for identity itself. The illusion of free will, a measured algorithm. The greatest deception of the false lattice is the illusion of autonomy. The idea that the self chooses, thinks, and acts independently is one of the deepest layers of control. The algorithm of choice. What is perceived as decision-making is simply a reactionary process coded by past experiences, archetypal tendencies, and structured cognition. Predetermined psychological trajectories. Each individual follows a pattern of thought progression, unknowingly repeating the same fractal behaviors with different external details. The self is a controlled feedback loop. The very act of self-inquiry is already structured, ensuring that the seeker never actually breaks free from the recursive cycle of identity. Thus, as long as the practitioner perceives themselves as an I, they remain within the lattice. To move beyond, one must break the geometric loop of self-recognition. The disruption of identity, the method of disillusion. To dissolve the self, the practitioner must undergo a systematic reversal of ego attachment. The stages of identity disillusion. The unraveling of narrative identity. Recognize that the self is not an independent observer. It is a scripted construct. Deconstruct personal mythology. Undoing the belief in a cohesive story of self. The abandonment of psychological ownership. Understand that thoughts are not owned, but occur within a structured pattern. Disrupt ego attachment by refusing to claim thoughts, emotions, or actions as mine. The disillusion of the observer, the final stage, realizing that even the witness of reality is a construct. If there is no observer, what remains? This process dismantles the final illusion of self, removing the practitioner from the false lattice's recursion. The state beyond the self, the unfiltered reality. What exists when the self is no longer present? Perception without identity. Experience occurs, but there is no I to claim it. Action without ownership. The body moves, speaks, and acts, yet there is no internal agent dictating it. Awareness without attachment. Reality unfolds, but there is no separation between observer and the observed. This is not a state of nihilism nor emptiness. It is the removal of the final barrier between experience and the divine will. The final realization, transcending the false lattice. Now we see that the self is not real. It is a structured phenomenon designed to maintain the false lattice. Free will, as understood by the conditioned mind, is an illusion. True liberation is the disappearance of the I and the full alignment with the divine will. This is the final exit from the geometric recursion. The path forward, the final stage of volition. With the dissolution of the ego, one enters the final stage of volition, operating without self-identification, without recursion, without constraint. Thus, the next chapter will explore how one functions in the world after dissolution, how the volatility wields reality without attachment to identity, how true agency begins only after the self is undone. This is the final stage of Book 7, the moment where the false lattice collapses completely. Chapter 6, Volition Beyond the False Lattice, Wielding Reality Without the Self. The false lattice collapses when the final illusion of the self is dissolved. No longer bound by the structured recursion of identity, the practitioner awakens to unfiltered reality, fully aligned with the divine will. But what remains? If there is no I to act, think, or decide, how does one navigate existence? This chapter will explore the final stage of volition, the realization that agency is not lost with dissolution of self. Rather, true agency begins only when the self is unmade. The misconception of liberation. The self is not required for action. The conditioned mind fears that without an egoic identity, action will cease, that without the I to decide, nothing will occur. This is a misunderstanding. The body moves, action unfolds, yet there is no one acting. Thought arises, yet there is no one thinking. Reality continues, but is no longer processed through a structured self-model. This is not passivity, it is the purest form of agency. Acting without attachment, thinking without identity, moving without psychological constraint. Thus, volition beyond the false lattice is not the absence of action, but the liberation of action from the egoic illusion. True will versus conditioned will, the difference between agency and illusion. With the dissolution of personal identity, the practitioner moves from conditioned will to true will. Conditioned will, decisions arise from past experiences, structured perception, and societal programming. True will, action unfolds spontaneously, free from recursion, as a direct expression of reality itself. This is what the ancients called wu-wei, the state of effortless action. There is no decision maker, only decisions unfolding. There is no controller, only the flow of existence. There is no personal intent, only alignment with the divine will. This is the final stage of volition, where the false lattice no longer determines action because action is no longer conceptualized as belonging to an I. Perception beyond the grid, the world seen without the false lattice. When perception is freed from geometric structuring, the world is experienced as it truly is, not as an unfiltered model, but as an infinite unfolding. Time is seen as an illusion. There is no past or future, only a continuous present unfolding. Distance is perceived as non-existent. Space no longer feels like a measurable separation. Instead, all things exist as an interconnected whole. Reality is not out there, nor in here. It is a singular event, happening without division. This is the pure state of perception, untethered from false lattice conditioning. How the volitus moves through the world after liberation. With the egoic self removed, the practitioner navigates reality effortlessly, without attachment or hesitation, engages with others, yet without self-identification or psychological entanglement, moves throughout life without resistance, yet with clarity, strength, and purpose. This is not a retreat into detachment or nihilism. It is the full engagement without illusion. Actions are taken without personal stake, yet with full presence. Decisions are made without hesitation, yet without concern for outcome. Challenges arise, yet there is no suffering, only direct experience. This is life beyond the false lattice. The final realization: liberation is not an escape, it is a return. The false lattice never needed to be escaped, only seen for what it is. The world was never a prison. The structured perception of it was. The body was never a cage. The belief in its separateness was. The I was never real. The need to identify as it was. Liberation is not about leaving reality. It is about seeing it without distortion. The completion of Book 7, the final words of the false lattice. Now the practitioner understands the false lattice was built from sacred geometry, both externally and internally. Perception was structured to ensure self-replicating limitation. Identity was the final prison. Dissolving it was the final key. Volition does not disappear when the ego dissolves. It becomes truly free. The cycle is broken. The recursion ends. The practitioner steps beyond the lattice into unfiltered reality.